Anthropological Optimism, Engaging the Power of What Could Go Right, edited by Anna Willow. Will feature different chapters by other people, but the first chapter is, or the introduction, is her own chapter. It's introducing the whole thing. So it's trying to give us an overview of the theme. Why optimism? She begins by saying that optimism is in short supply. That's for sure. For the reasons that we talked about in the last class as we were wrapping up our human adaptability module. One reason, as she mentions, and we talked about before, these inequalities between regions and within different regions and the extremeness of that inequality. She uses a term that I like, an ecocidal overshoot. So ecocide, that means the death of the ecosystem. That would make us sad. And she mentions, of course, what we've already been talking about, climate change, but she brings in something else that we didn't quite talk about, that they're going extinct. And so this predicted that, in fact, that's the ecocide part, there's going to be mass extinctions. And so we also have the places that have been the most vulnerable or seem to be the most affected by this, but they're also the ones who are using the least resources or were the least responsible for the predicament we're in. Now, Willow mentions that in the 70s or 1960s or 70s, people started using these computer models 5 decades ago. Yeah, that's the 1970s. And they started to talk about what will happen. And they said, well, it's probably likely that there's going to be a societal collapse. They started to predict societal collapse. How are we doing on that prediction? Right on schedule, that's right. So it seems like this idea that we are indeed headed for collapse is, we're right on it. We're moving right along. If we continue called business as usual. So if we just keep doing what we're doing, probably gonna end up with all these bad things happening. So that makes us sad. Now, if you turn the page then, though, it says that there are other models for this. There's another model called comprehensive technology model, which is more like a soft landing. But there's even another scenario called a stabilized world scenario, which Willow says is not out of reach. That is to say, we could still make it to that. We're going to need to change some things, that we change where our priorities are and start to use different innovations and make more innovations in order to change the trajectory and the business as usual. So there are people who get motivated out of fear. Fear is an excellent motivator sometimes, but for the most part, humans are strange. We can't function if we're solely motivated by fear. Maybe you can, but most of us need to see that there's something else that we can do. So as she talks about, we need to have attractive alternatives that are both visible, you can see them, and accessible. Because it turns out that a lot of people, if they see that you can do something different, it helps you change your destructive practices. We don't want to start slacking. You don't want to say everything is fine, but you have to give people a reason to change. And as you put it, you cited all those statistics for the youth, the sad youth of America and everywhere. They're all depressed and stuff, which is true. Anxiety and depression are huge. And so we need to put the idea that there are still positive possibilities. They say that if you don't do this, there are two things that if you get sad, if you get too sad, you end up in either paralyzing despair. We know that what that is, we're just can't do anything. We're paralyzed because we're too sad, or hedonistic excess. Basically, it's going going wild and partying and excessive party mentality because there's nothing else to do. So again, that would be like the total slacking. So you want to have that mixture, but in general, it helps have a more positive idea. Now, in this section, he asks, what is optimism? And turns us over to psychology. Yes, psychologists Carver and others call this generalized favorable expectancies for their future, the degree to which people have generalized favorable expectancies for their future. Now, she says that this is kind of like the idea of hope. A lot of similarities between optimism and hope, but in some ways, what is different or important is it's not simply being certain, or it's not being passive about it. It's an acknowledgement that things could go right. Or as the book is subtitled, Engaging the Power of What Could Go Right. So it doesn't necessarily mean it is going to go right. She says it might be better construed as active hope. So you're hoping that things are going to go right, but you're trying to do something about that. So a little bit more of you don't want to be slacking, right? So that's the optimism part. And she acknowledges that it is not without potential pitfalls. That is to say, there could be some stumbling blocks or some issues here with just having a too optimistic or not a too optimistic, but a weird optimism. So she says we shouldn't be just dismissing reality. If the glass is half full and we want to say, oh, I'm hopeful because I have a half full glass, that doesn't mean I believe that the glass is all full. Take account of what's going on. I have a half full glass. And she also says that it doesn't justify bad things. So just because we're optimistic doesn't mean we want to go out and start doing bad stuff, bad causes. And we shouldn't look back on history and say, oh, yes, everything's just getting better and better, and it wasn't that bad in the past. And we should take account of what we've talked about, the ecocidal history, the stuff that led to the place that we're in. It's most succinctly put as it's not naive. So being optimistic or trying to find what could go right is not the same as being naive or denying what is actually happening. So you want to be optimistic, but not naive. Now, that's the psychological and philosophical perspective. She mentions here, we're of course in an anthropology class. I would say that there's been a lot of what Sherry Ortner calls dark anthropology. A lot of anthropology you read, you're talking about people who are often marginalized and yeah, they're trying to shift these things. She mentions a book by Nancy Shepherd Hughes. It's a pretty famous book called Death Without Weeping, the Violence of Everyday Life in Brazil. And she uses it as an example of activism and engagement in anthropology. But for me, it's an example of this idea of dark anthropology in the sense that she's studying in a community in Brazil, which is one of the most highly marginalized area where the people were in a very unequal relationship to the landowners, and so her idea of death without weeping was the fact that the infant mortality rate in this community was quite high, and she uses the word nonchalant to describe how some mothers might react to the death of an infant. I'm not sure if Shepherd Hughes would say that it's not that they're nonchalant exactly, but it's that they would need to accept that reality in order to keep living. And so in some ways, and of course, Shepherd Hughes does compare it to our own society, say 100 or years ago. Infant mortality was just a part of life. If you were a parent, you were probably going to lose at least one of your children in the early days. And Shepard Hughes says that people had a different idea about what that meant at the time. Now, that said, Shepard Hughes is trying to move us toward a different kind of anthropology, to a more hopeful perspective, or what is called anthropology of the good. So to try, not to deny that people have difficult lives and that we still need to document the lives of the people who are marginalized, but trying to understand, can we move to a different place? So, what is exactly the optimism of anthropology? One of them, she has three premises here, three main ideas behind it. One of them is simply an ethical responsibility. So to try to use the knowledge that people have and people have gained, the skills that people have, to apply them and to resolve these challenges, to be engaged in the world, not just studying it. The second principle, you're listening to people who have already been there, looking for things that are looking for people who are already in those situations. And so if we can show people how different possibilities are out there and different things are possible, then it makes it more likely that people will engage and invest in these alternatives. Again, we don't want to slack off, so we don't want to get overly optimistic, but it seems like the research shows that if you believe it, then it's more likely that you'll actually do it. And finally, that anthropology as a discipline needs to bet on human beings. Not everybody bets on human beings. Some people think we're not the best, but that we can have faith that human beings have been able to imagine and to do things that are positive in the world. Not always, of course. We don't want to miss out on humans being bad. We know that we can be bad, but we can also have this capacity for doing good stuff. Now, one of the other sources for this optimism, which was really interesting to me, and I think is an important thing to point out, is that one of the sources of this is coming from the indigenous scholarship, or people who are, we might call native scholars, people who are working in native communities. And in these places, and we've talked about, in some ways, they have been subjected to this idea of having dystopian futures. So the idea that they've been marginalized and they're now climate change is coming. And so as they put it, this is an unrelenting element of their people's actual experience. And so for many indigenous peoples, when we think about the apocalypse, it already happened. So for many indigenous peoples, it's not something in the future, that's the past. That's what already happened under colonialism. And so what has been happening, and again, this is coming from indigenous scholars and indigenous peoples themselves, is the idea that we're going to trade or exchange this apocalyptic gloom for a more generative outlook, or to not do so much research on damage and how bad things are. Again, we're not going to sugarcoat that or neglect the bad things that have been done, but to try and focus instead on what people aspire to, the desire, what they want, what they can do. And again, in the recognition that for many indigenous peoples, there already was an apocalypse, and in some ways, they're still here and have things to say and do in the world. Another couple interesting things about this. One of them was the whole idea of the future. So anthropology is very famous for either talking to people about what's going on in today's world, or in documenting and talking to people about history and the past and their traditions, right? And so I sometimes wondered when people say, hey, we're going to do an anthropology of the future, that's a question to me. How can we do an anthropology of the future? It hasn't even happened yet. Can't do that. We can document the past and we can document the present, but how can we know the future? How might we do an anthropology of the future? A great quote, which is, people everywhere think about the future. So what I was confused by when I was thinking about this is the idea that anthropology was going to be in the future. No, we're just doing an anthropology of talking to people about what they think about the future, and in some ways trying to understand different perspectives on the future and different ideas about that, because those things that people are thinking about what's going to happen in the future then inspire what they are doing in the present. So it's simply a matter of turning our focus a little bit from trying to document what has happened or what is happening to trying to talk to people about, hey, what do you think is going to happen in the future? How do you make that future possible? Related to that, the idea of design anthropology. Now, this is a new thing. It's really just starting out in recent years, because usually the people who do design are sitting there trying to design things that don't exist yet, while the people that do anthropology have been talking to people about things that they are doing or have already done. And so usually these are two different things, but design anthropology is starting to bring together those who are thinking about bringing things into existence and designing things that people can use. But anthropology can come in and talk about, well, what do people want to do? How might they imagine this? How might that change their lives? So again, this is just starting out a little bit, and what they mention is design doesn't just mean objects, not just objects, but it makes cultures of the future, thinking about how we might transform the whole ways that people interact with each other, maybe get away from some of these more destructive practices, you might say. So again, this is a field that is in its beginning stages, but they say that it is one of those things that, like future-oriented in anthropology, that is oriented toward what is good that is happening, desires and aspirations. It is an inherently, or perhaps an inherently optimistic field. Arturo Escobar, who himself is quoting some people in Afro-Colombian people and African Americans, you might say, in Colombia and South America, we talk about the idea of desoñar, of dreaming with the intention of creating. So Escobar wrote this in a book called Designs for the Pluriverse. And again, trying to get away from the idea that there's only one possible future and concentrating on the multiple possibilities in how people are making their worlds.